Hi, I'm Craig.
I'm Donna. Welcome to our home. We are here with our
E-bikes.
new e-bikes.
So,
What do you think?
you're thinking about e-bikes. What do you need to know? What do you need to think about as you're making that decision, whether to buy, what type to buy? We're going to run through all of that, and then at the end of this, I'm going to show you some data that'll give you a sense or a feel for what the benefits of an e-bike might be. But there's a lot to talk about and there's a lot to get through. So, let's do it.
Make sure you subscribe and hit the like button, please.
Oh yeah, and comment. We love the interactions we're getting from you all. So any thoughts you had, any questions, comments, corrections, all that stuff's all good. So thumbs up, notifications if this stuff's valuable to you, and here we go. We are going to get back to some travel videos soon. We got Cades Cove and the Keys coming
In
up.
Florida.
But in the meantime, while we're here, we got into the e-bike scene because of all we saw in the RV world. Every time we would go to a new site, there was couples out there or people out there with these e-bikes, and it got us very, very interested in it. The very cool thing about e-bikes, one of the coolest things about e-bikes, is that it's bringing riders back into biking.
Right.
So people that hadn't biked in years, older couples where they had maybe some physical limitations, all of a sudden found a tool to enter into the e-bike realm. Now there's all different kinds of e-bikes. We're going to kind of run through that and the things you need to think about as you're choosing an e-bike for yourself.
What we liked about them, first and foremost, is that we live in Georgia, which is very hilly. So we were limited to our bike rides. But now with these e-bikes, we can go further, steeper,
With less fear.
with, well, not only less fear, but less pain at the end of the ride.
Yeah, both good, fear and pain.
Right.
You can reduce both of those, you're doing all right. So here are the basics of an e-bike. An e-bike is essentially a two-motored unit. One of the motors is you, and the other is supplied by the bike. Now I say that in broad terms. Where the motor is on the bike can differ depending on the style of the bike and the manufacturer. The motor can either be part of the hub in the front or the rear of the bike, or it can be centered, a drive. And the central drive is what we went with, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why we kind of did that. E-bikes, like all other bikes, acoustic bikes, the non-e-bike version, come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and uses. And it's really important to understand how you're going to use a bike before you go and start making your final selection. We see this question all the time. Can I use an e-bike for mountain biking and road biking? Well, yes and no. You can, but there's compromises. A mountain bike is designed for a different function than a road bike. And a road bike and a gravel bike can also be a little bit different. Let's take a little bit of a look at why they're different so that you can first start with how am I going to use the bike and what's the right type of bike, and then we'll get into the specifics of the e-bikes. Let's talk about the different styles of bikes before we get into the motor and how to use them. So a mountain bike has a very specific design. It's designed to go over sticks, stumps, rocks climbing. And for that, it has a couple of geometry differences and feature differences. If you bounce on the bike, you see that it's spring-loaded. And Donna's mountain bike has about 150 millimeters of travel on the front and back. And that travels great when it comes down to suspension. But it also requires extra power. When you're trying to climb, you're fighting not only gravity, but you're fighting that spring. The other thing that's different is her geometry. So the way that Donna is sitting on that bike is different than it is on a road bike. She's actually kind of more in the bike and really in back of the pedals. So her weight distribution is almost right on top of the center of the bike. And then the gearing of the bike here, you see the front gear is very, very small. So the number of teeth, the leverage you get out of this is greater. It's designed so that you have more torque, more power, more leverage from your feet, and less about top end speed, because that's what you need when you're mountain biking.
You can also see on the mountain bike these big, thick, knobby tires, which are just what you need to get up over the tree stumps and the rocks and whatnot. And it's also a lot heavier than, say, our carbon bike and even the carbon e-bike.
All right, so mountain bike weight, this is not an exact science, we're kind of holding them on a scale, but 30.2 pounds. All right, here we have Donna on her road bike. Now this is the Specialized Ruby, which is the women's version of the Roubaix, and it's a street bike. It's carbon built. It's got good hardware, but you'll see a couple of the fundamental differences we just talked about. One is, yes, and she does love this bike. One is that her riding position is slightly different. She's more on top of the bike.
And forward.
And forward. So, right, her weight is leaning forward. You get a lot of your weight out over not only the gear and the hub, but the front tire. And the front tires, as Donna pointed out in her mountain bike, are completely different. So, very skinny, very thin. They're meant not for comfort, but for speed, to have the minimal amount of drag resistance. Now, what that does is it also limits you on the type of roads that you can go on. So, could you ride this on a mountain trail? Well,
no.
Technically you could, but you have compromises, right? And that's really the name of the game, is how much compromise are you willing to put up with to get the right bike for you. On the mountain bikes, you had geometry and you had suspension. There's not really suspension. There's a couple of tricks that Specialized does to give you a little bit of leeway, but ultimately it's not designed for things that are rough. The little thin, skinny, flat, slick tires are meant for pavement, and they like smooth pavement.
Right, and the lightweight does give you more agility and speed.
Yes, it does. So let's take a look at the bike over standing on top of it. What you really see is you see kind of a very thin and light profile of the bike, front to back. And then let's see how much this bike weighs in.
More science. 10 pounds lighter.
Yeah, so 2/3 the weight of a mountain bike. So that's a significant amount of weight. You think about when we lose 10 pounds on our bodies, how much difference that makes in our life. 10 pounds on a bike is even greater. All right, so there's Donna up on her e-bike. Again, this is a Specialized. This is the Creo, Comp, SL, Carbon, Evo. I'll get into why it's that and how they got to those names so that you understand what you're buying and what you're looking at when you're looking at the Specialized brand. But this bike is a road bike, except it has slightly wider tires and a little bit different hardware. And that means that it's suited for gravel. And we have a lot of gravel around here, and we've got a lot of rough roads. So one of the differences is that the tire is somewhere between the street tire and the mountain bike tire. Could I take this mountain biking on a single track? You could.
Maybe.
It's a compromise. Think about driving your sports car on a Jeep trail. And could you get it from point A to point B? You could.
Just
Would
ain't
you
gonna
want
be
to?
pretty.
It's not going to be pretty.
But with a lot of our camping, we're parked on dirt roads, sometimes gravel and rocks. This will have no problem
No.
getting us to the main road.
Yep. So if you look at the geometry, again, it's very, very similar to Donna's Specialized road bike, except you've got this added motor and this battery. So the motor here is a hub motor. I'm sorry, it's not a hub motor. It's a central or mid-drive motor. So it's here at the pedal, and it's kind of buried or integrated into the frame. And the batteries are in this center tube on the frame itself. So what you end up with is a very, very well integrated package that doesn't look a whole lot like an e-bike.
No, Specialized does a great job of keeping everything very slim and streamlined.
Yeah.
Looks a lot like the regular road bike.
Yeah, so the design elements of the Creo and the SL is to minimize weight. And you see that a lot with bikes. Whenever a biker talks about the benefits of their racing bike, a lot of it comes down to the weight saved.
Right.
And you could pound big motors and big batteries on an e-bike. That's one philosophy. The other philosophy is the same as biking. And just minimize the weight, minimize the design. And it really depends on what the bike is designed to do for you. Survey says
31.6.
which
Wow.
is about the size and weight of the mountain bike. Now, that's extremely light for an e-bike. You will see e-bikes out there that weigh 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds. And again, that depends on your usage. The batteries weigh a good amount.
And the
Motors
fact that
can
this
weigh.
is carbon, not aluminum, makes it a
big
lot
difference.
lighter.
Right. So this bike is designed like a road bike. They take advantage of the gravel tires, even though they would give you a little more resistance than what you're used to. You have the motor, which helps compensate it.
Right.
The Specialized bikes, the Creo bikes, are e-bikes for bike riders. And what I mean by that is that if you're serious about investing or riding a road bike, the Creo SL is your next step into e-bikes. It used to be that e-bikes were kind of a, I'm not going to ride an e-bike because it's cheating kind of thing. And that's no longer the case. You see a lot of athletes out there on e-bikes, and they use them for different reasons. They use them on off days, they use them for longer rides, they use them to help build form. And they'll use them in conjunction with their acoustic bikes because they want both types of rides. This ride gives you a very aerobic type workout.
It's very efficient.
It takes the edges off the hills, it takes a lot of the excess workout, and it keeps your heart range in a very, very stable cardio range,
Right.
which is great for calorie burning and endurance building. For strength and anaerobic exercise, you still have the street bikes. So we use both, and we'll show you again at the end of the video a little bit of the metrics and what happens when you take a ride on an acoustic bike and then just give a level 1 assist of 3 with an e-bike. So choosing an e-bike, as we said, the first thing you need to do is you need to understand how you're going to use the bike, any bike, whether it's going to be for mountain riding, trail riding, and how much of a compromise you're willing to put up with when you're selecting your bike. Once you have that in mind and you set up a budget, you can start narrowing down your list or start looking at specific bikes. When it comes down to bikes and e-bikes, an e-bike is probably about 2x the price of an equivalent bike, roughly speaking. So if my street bikes are $3,000 to $4,000 street bikes and I want the equivalent in an e-bike, I'm going to spend $7,000 or $8,000. That's kind of the range difference. You always get what you pay for. There's only a couple of ways that you can reduce costs, mainly because a lot of these components are actually third party. The rails, the brakes, all these varying components are used commonly around bikes, and the grade you use is going to be different from bike to bike. So when it comes down to what you're pricing and what you're getting, if you buy a $1,000 e-bike, you're buying a $500 bike and $500 worth of motor, electronics, and batteries. Same thing's true with the road bike. If you have a $3,000 bike and it's a road bike, carbon, specialized like we have, you're going to spend about 2x of that if you take that same bike with the same level of equipment and electronify it.
That being said, I think it would be rough going from our nice lightweight carbon road bikes and not getting, you know, kind of the equivalent in the e-bike.
That was a compromise we weren't willing to make. When it came down to what we chose and why we chose it, there were certain compromises which were acceptable. One was we knew that the price was going to be significantly higher. We still wanted the carbon feel of a bike, which tends to be a little less abrupt through bounces. It just seems to smooth the ride out a little bit. It's lightweight, and equally important was that the bike's mass wasn't great. I didn't have to overcome a lot of weight with a big motor, and I don't need distance with big batteries. Now that's another thing you're going to see out there in the e-bike world. People talk about like how many hours or how many miles, and of course it's subjective depending on the level of assist you're requiring and the type of rider you are. Even your weight can impact batteries. I will say this, that I get in rough terrain, hilly terrain, and aggressive riding, we get about 4 hours of riding. So if I have access to charging the bike at night, the bike can outlast me. I don't have an issue with the length of my batteries. Now, if I'm camping and I'm not able to get to plugs where I can charge it overnight, then maybe a secondary battery might be nice, or replaceable batteries might be nice. But in a single day where I have time to charge overnight, I will never last longer than a bike with a single battery.
And these specialized Creos do come with a extra battery option that will, when we do get one, will go right there.
And it looks kind of like a water bottle.
Yeah.
They've done a nice job integrating.
It's very cool. Well, another thing I like about the e-bikes is that it kind of levels out the playing field for Craig and I.
Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
So there's times that like I feel great and we can keep up, and then there's times that like I'm not as strong that day. And what's cool about the e-bike is that all I have to do is, if I find I'm lagging behind, I'll go into sport mode, which is kind of the number 2 level. And it's like somebody just gently pushes my back and says, here you go, here's a little, go catch up.
Yeah.
And then I catch up. Whereas with the my other road bike, I was expending so much extra energy trying to catch up to Craig that I was just, just wasting energy. So,
Awesome.
there's that.
Okay, so how do you reduce costs? They said you're going to get what you pay for. You can either cut the price of the components, the hardware. You can try and reduce your manufacturing costs by doing them overseas or maybe in an inexpensive labor market. Most bike manufacturers kind of already do that. You can cut out the middleman and go direct to consumer. And we had considered some bikes that were e-commerce driven. We elected not to because for us, we think that the service component of a bike and the dealer network is really, really important. And I also wanted to be able to ride the bike. And that's something that's very difficult to do with some of the e-commerce or site-based bike manufacturers. Not that they're not great or not doing a fantastic job, it's just that the way that they decided to go to market to help reduce the price wasn't a fair trade-off for us. I like that dealer network.
Now, when you get an e-commerce bike, Craig, do you have to put the bike together?
Very often you do. Now they've done a nice job with maybe it's just a front wheel assembly or they've minimized it, but you have to be semi-mechanical, and of course you're dealing with heavy shipments. Some of these bikes do weigh up to 80 pounds, so all of that kind of comes into play. Okay, so first off, e-biking in the RV community or the travel community is getting huge. It's getting people back into biking. There's a lot of fellow seniors who are now riding where they hadn't ridden before. And if e-bikes do nothing more for the world than that, then it's fantastic. Kudos to everyone that's jumped back on a bike or thinking about jumping back on a bike. There's the other extreme of the expert riders who have taken into account e-bikes as a part of their training regimen, maybe supplementing their acoustic bikes. And then there's Don and I. We're kind of somewhere in the middle. We ride 200 to 400 miles a month, depending on what kind of terrain we're in. And we've settled now on the fact that mountain biking is not so much a part of our future as road biking, but because we're in parking lots filled with gravel and RV sites, and some of these roads that get you back to the RV sites, and a lot of the national parks are dirt, gravel, or not well paved, we elected to go with a gravel bike. So all of those things kind of came into play. We love the specialized brand in the bikes. It's what we're used to riding. We like the high quality carbon bikes that they have. We love the road style. But because of the electronics, the motor, batteries, we were able to add the gravel tires and some of the gravel hardware, pick that end up without sacrificing too much because we've picked up an extra 10 pounds, or the bike itself doesn't feel sluggish because we've got assistance. You think of these things as a plug-in hybrid, right? Where you're gonna plug them in, you charge them up, typically overnight, it takes a couple hours to get a full charge, and then you're part of the energy and the motor's part of the energy. And how much energy or assistance you need is completely selectable. On this bike, 3 levels, right? There's eco, ride or trail, and then turbo. And those 3 modes will determine how much assistance the bike's gonna give you.
So why an e-bike, Craig?
That's a great question. We have our acoustic bikes, we like riding them. However, we wanted to be able to ride longer, further, with less complications. So that's number one. And let's talk a little bit about what those complications are.
Well, the fact that we really had just one trail that we were taking every single time we were riding our bike. This opened up a whole new
World.
Yeah, a whole new world of, where we would normally go somewhere and we were going up or down a hill and turn around and go, we're never going to get back.
Yeah.
This really gave us more opportunity to take that path.
Right. So in the biking world, it's a little backwards, but the same thing applies. What goes down must come up.
Right.
And that gives you this sense of, hey, I'm going to go down this hill. On our acoustic bikes, if that was a long stretch, like half a mile,
we knew we were doomed.
turn around. We just don't take that path. So we would have to track paths where the levels of hills in our ride, in our route, were such that we could endure it. And we could endure it in relatively good form. Look, I'm 61 years old, my hips aren't great, that means my knees are under stress, and my form on a bike is really, really important. When I'm pressing, going up a hill or for speed, over and beyond where my mechanical body wants to go, I get hurt. right? My knee aches, my back aches. So being able to smooth out those roads, which are not under your control normally, is huge. Where I can maintain proper form, not be afraid of going down a hill knowing I have to come back up a hill, and I'm going to get home safely in one piece without complete exhaustion.
And don't you find you're using your muscles more and more efficiently because you're not, you know,
Relying just solely on that?
you know, I would poop Peter out before I even, you know, got halfway up the hill because my lungs weren't taking it. Or now, as I don't feel like I'm working quite as hard, but yet my muscles are still burning, still getting those circles in.
Yeah, I think that's the whole idea of aerobic exercise versus the anaerobic exercise. And in the workout regimen, there's a place for both. If you think about the wanting to really burn out, I got 40 minutes or 45 minutes and I want to have an endurance type ride where I'm building strength, the anaerobic stuff comes into play. You hop on the acoustic bike, you hit some hills and you come back. If you want 2 hours of constant aerobic, and you need to take out those rough edges, stay in good form, that's where the e-bike
And
is.
we did.
Absolutely
We did
brilliant.
2 hours on
33
hills.
miles on
Hills.
hills. And still had more than, we did the ride twice and still had battery left over.
Which was great.
So it gives you kind of a sense for what the e-bike can actually do for you. Because a lot of people think, well, I'm going to buy an e-bike because I don't want to work. And there are bikes for that. There are bikes with throttles, there are bikes you don't have to pedal a lot, massive motors, massive batteries, where you can just let the bike do 90% of the
Yeah,
work.
we didn't want that.
The Creo's a little different. The Creo's more about assisting a biker. So in our case, right, it's a little push, right?
It feels like that.
Right? Where it's just I'm going and the bike's giving me a little lift. Or it's like being gifted with Lance Armstrong's legs.
Right.
Right? All of a sudden you've got more juice than you thought you had.
Now, like I said, we live in Georgia, so we have a lot of hills. What's going to be interesting is when we go to Florida, how are we going to incorporate the e-bikes
On flat terrain.
on flat? I mean,
And we may not. We may decide that that's the perfect time just to bring the acoustic bikes and ride, unless we're going to go up and down the Keys for
yeah, if we're going
90
to go
miles.
20 miles one way, 20 miles another way.
Right. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people use the e-bikes even in flat. It just depends on what you want and what you need for your body. The important thing is to ride, right?
Exactly.
Just get out and move. And if the e-bike brings a new level of riders in, if you find an e-bike that gives you the power and the battery and the price and the type of riding you do, then we say go for it. Because anything that keeps you moving is going to help you, in theory, live longer and a better lifestyle, and that equals happiness. So they say you can't buy happiness and you can't buy time. You kind of can, right? If you keep yourself in good shape, get up on the bike, ride the bike. If it's an e-bike, fantastic. If it's a big motor e-bike, whatever you need to get up, find the right bike for you. Find the style of bikes. Don't play into the compromises. If you have a wish list that says, I'm going to ride mountain trails and road bikes and some gravel and go up hills and down track, and I want one bike to do it, take a Miata through a Jeep trail. You're going to get the same result, right? You're going to come out and you're going to be so loaded with compromises that it's not going to be good for everything. So pick the bike you want, pick the brand you want, find a budget, find a bike that's comfortable, go out and ride it if dealer network's important to you. And then of course right now with COVID, stock and inventory is important, because everyone's waiting on the same components.
We got so lucky with these bikes because we were making phone calls and nobody had any inventory, and then Frank stumbled upon
Peachtree
bikes.
Bikes in Atlanta, and they had the inventory.
so
They had
many.
a small for Donna, a medium for me, and the exact bikes we wanted. It was kind of perfect.
meant to be.
Yeah. Normally it's like a 2, 3, 6 month. There was one Trek bike that was like May of 2022 if we went that route.
Right.
So that's another thing to consider with any of these e-bikes.
Yep.
This is the data that we were talking about at the beginning. I use Strava. So this is a ride on my acoustic non-electric bike. This is a 13.86 mile ride, 54 minutes. My average heart rate was 150, max 172. So that compares with the electric bike. And the electric bike, same ride, average speed 17.4. My heart rate was 143, max of 161. That's what level 1 assists. So overall, this is what we talked about. All right, so here's an example of e-bike mania and our hills. We could not do this on an acoustic bike. Well done!